Oh my God. Hey. Hi. You have officially tuned into some shit. What type of shit that is, we're not totally sure yet. We're going to play this. This is the first episode. Of I Swear to Drunk I'm Not God. Congratulate me. Thank you. Clap. It's fine. It's okay. It's cool. Okay. I released an intro video describing, what to expect on this very brand new true crime / paranormal / all things weird fucking podcast. But if you didn't listen to that video, or I guess you didn't listen to that audio, then you don't know who I am. My name is Britt. You don't know me at all. That's okay. You will eventually. I Swear to Drunk I'm Not God is a new true crime podcast / paranormal / weird type of podcast that I have come up with that incorporates weird shit with booze. So we're going to get tipsy while we talk about fucked up stuff. Okay. I'm very excited to do this. As you can tell, I keep clapping like I'm a fucking seal. It's weird. With that being said, what I do is I make a cocktail over on TikTok. From TikTok, you could come by, the podcast and drink it with me or not. Totally up to you. No judgment there. But what I did today was I basically made a corpse reviver. And as we talk about this monster today, you'll see why we're drinking on a corpse reviver. So the corpse reviver is basically gin with an absinthe rinse, some lemon juice, some Cointreau or Grand Marnier, and then ice, and then you shake that shit up and you drink it. So that's what excuse me, that's what we're fucking with today. So now I'm feeling good today, like abnormally good. Like I mentioned in my intro, like these last few weeks for me have been very, very hard. I'm trying to collect myself. And we're not going to get into any of that personal shit. What we're going to do is we're going to focus on what we're here to focus on. Now I'm going to try to stay as even as I can. I go up and down, up and down, up and down. And plus I'm drinking. So there's that element too. I'm going to try very hard to keep this so chronological that you will fully understand what we're doing. But if I fall off along the way, growing pains. Okay. This is a new podcast. So let's fuck around and find out. I bet that. Let's just do that. So here we go. This first episode, and if you saw what I titled it, it is The Monster of 63rd Street. If you know anything about true crime, if you know anything about weird serial killer shit, then you already know who this is. We are talking about the motherfucking Chicago's very own H.H. Holmes. Now, I'm hyping him up, okay? Like, this is Drink Champs, and, like, we giving him flowers. But he was a monster. He was a terrible person. He was mad toxic, super chaotic, but that's what makes shit like this very interesting, especially while you're drinking. So these are all for our cocktails are for the homies that aren't here, for the victims, the survivors, whatever. It is not for the serial killers. Fuck those dudes. They were trash. They don't get love. But we do talk about the grotesqueries. I do not edit myself, as you can see. I probably use the F word probably like 5 times already. So what we'll do this first episode is we'll focus on the Monster of 63rd Street, that being the one and the only H.H. Holmes, Chicago local. Okay. If you've been living under a rock, you don't know who he is. But he's been covered so many goddamn times, it doesn't even make sense. It's hard when you're dealing with such a historical case to not fall into these like mini wormholes of like, oh shit, okay, then that year he did this thing, okay, and then you fall into another wormhole. So I'm going to try to keep this as concise as I possibly can. Now, this dude was an absolute mess. But the books that I relied on for this research, excuse me, H. Holmes, The True History of the White City Devil by Adam Seltzer, which I will say off the rip is where I got majority of my information, because I've noticed as I was researching him that there are a lot of sources that are kind of inflamed. They put, some creative license, some spin on some shit. So I was trying to keep it down to raw facts. And it seems that Adam Seltzer is one of the people that is like a Holmes historian. He's also a local in Chicago. He's doing a virtual tour. He's been doing ghost tours and things like that for a while, but he's doing a virtual tour regarding like H. Holmes, and he's answering questions tomorrow. So I'm super excited to join that panel. I'm not on the panel, but just to join as like a viewer because it's on YouTube. Also, I read Depraved by Harold Schechter, which I've already like heard of him. I've seen him before, just like Adam. They are both two very prominent voices when it comes to Holmes history. And then I also picked up, I'm not gonna lie, I kind of skipped all the architecture shit, but I did pick up Devil in the White City, and I kind of read like the H. Holmes chapters. No disrespect to the book, but I mean, I had a goal and I was trying to stick to that goal. So I also looked at another ebook that Adam Seltzer did. I'm still working on that, but that has more so to do with Holmes once he comes to Chicago, which, as you'll see, like he was kind of all over the place. But like once he gets to Chicago, I'm still kind of researching that part of this. So what we'll focus on first is the early years. We're focused on Holmes, where he's born, who he was as a child, as a teenager, up into his college years, how he kind of came about, or really how that interest in being a terrible person came about. And obviously it was something that he was pretty good at. But what I was saying was that I read another book by Adam Seltzer, and it's a quick little 65-page thing where he actually went to Holmes's murder castle. So we're going to talk about that probably on another episode. And what I mean by that is this is going to be a multi-parter. Holmes was very, very busy, even though he only did this shit for a little bit of time. He was very young when he was finally executed. But there's some elements to his beginning that I felt like was very, very important that I really, really wanted to focus on for the first episode. And I'm gonna just be honest, and so I can get comfortable with doing this shit, because nobody told me that setting up for a podcast, as far as like making sure that your sound is crisp and making sure that you have a host and making sure that you tell people that your podcast is like all of that. I was just doing this because I was interested in weird shit. And I think my friends are sick of hearing me talk about it. So I always feel like, I find really interesting stories all the time that I would love to share with people, but not all my friends are interested in what the fuck I gotta say. I talk a lot, and some of my friends don't like supernatural shit. Some of my friends don't like paranormal shit. So I'm being respectful of my relationships as well by having this podcast. So I'm at this point now where I'm like, if it works out, it doesn't. If it works out, it does. If it doesn't work out, then it doesn't. And I'm not going to die. This is something I'm really, really into. And so I'm just going to give it all that I have, and we'll see what happens. I'm not a fucking historian. Okay. I've been out of school for a very long time. Researching and like creating an outline on a motherfucker that I don't know is something that I've been out of practice, like way out of practice. So, this has been a learning process. And like I said, I had 2 weeks down where I was dealing with some emotional shit. And so, I kind of slowed down as well. So please bear with me. I am a new podcast host. Do I care about your opinions overall? Yes. Do I take anything internally? Not really. So feel free to be like, Brittany, you should probably take a fucking lozenge before your airing. I'm super nasally and mucusy. I'm also drinking at the same time. So you're going to hear smacks, gulps, all types of shit. As I get more intoxicated, I also get hot. So you may hear me turn on a fan. You may hear me open a window. I don't know. But I'm just like, I want to lay it out raw, and I want to use this first 10 minutes of just being like, look, this is not going to be absolute perfection, and you shouldn't be an asshole and expect that. Okay? All right. Let me take a sip. So now this guy, H.H. Holmes, was pretty prolific. It's believed that he killed anywhere between 9 and 200 people, which is like, if you said you had but anything between $9 and $200, like $9 and $200 are two totally different numbers. And 200 people is a lot of people for one person to have killed. Adam Seltzer, on the other hand, has this like opinion about Holmes where a lot of what we know about him, or what we consistently hear about him, or what writers who have not really like dove into the archives and read the articles and things like that, that the surface shit that people know about Holmes, he believes that Holmes may not have been as I don't want to say crazy. He may not have been as like prolific as far as like killing was concerned as we all think he was, because Holmes was a lot about just being deranged and, again, depraved, like Harold Schechter called him. But also there's an element to him that's just for profit, and at some point his interest in killing people was more financial than it was just like being a fucking demonic, terrible human being. So as we get into this, you'll be able to make your own assessment. So please pick your own poison. You do not have to drink the Corpse Reviver, which is what I'm drinking. Grab your fucking laundry. We're about to get into this. Now, Herman Webster Mudgett, okay, was the name he was born with. Herman Webster Mudgett. He was born in a small farming town called Gilmanton, New Hampshire, May 16th, 1861. He was a Taurus, and I'm a Taurus. That's all I gotta say. He had blue eyes, brown hair. Gilmanton, like I said, was a very small farming town. And Holmes once said it was so remote from the outside world that daily newspapers were rare and almost unknown. So they kind of didn't have a lot of access to the outside world. His family were the first white settlers in town back in 1761. And he was the third of 5 children. So he's, they're kind of like, they created their foundation in Gilmanton, New Hampshire. Him being the third of 5 children, that's pretty normal too. People back then used to have kids. They used to have kids just so they could like help with the house and fucking farm and do all that type of shit. So his parents having 5 children is not really that surprising. He grew up Methodist. Now, I'm going to always mention what people's religion is. Religion fascinates me. I did not grow up religious. I didn't grow up going to church all the time other than like to just go and like drink the like wines and shit. Cause I used to go with I used to go with a childhood friend and her family, and we used to drink like the grape juice. I was always drunk. We used to go back there and try to drink the grape juice. Like that was the best part. And to be quite frank, music, especially in a Baptist church, is just like on a whole other level. So I'm not disrespectful to religion. I appreciate religion and I understand why religion exists. I'm just not religious. So what I did is when I found out he grew up Methodist, I was like, I've heard of Methodists. I've seen African Episcopal Methodists. I've seen all types of Methodists, like situations, United Methodists. Just what does that mean? How would a Methodist describe their faith? So I looked it up on resourceumc.org. The United Methodists believe in actualizing their faith in the community. Actions speak louder than words. The 3 simple rules are: do no harm, do good, and stay in love with God. Some beliefs they share with other Christians are the Trinity, God as the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and Jesus's birth, death, and resurrection. Which, I mean, if we're being honest, just seems like some religious shit to me. That's what religious, it's people who especially have like, sorry, I'm like belching. People who especially have their religion based in Christianity or whatever, like Catholicism. It's kind of like, to me, okay, got it. There's nothing alarming here. His mother, her name was Theodate. She was the super religious one. She was very pious. His father, Herman's father, Levi, was a house painter. Later, he would become a postmaster. He was a strong disciplinarian. if you will. Now, you know, I think that's relative. I think nowadays, like, I grew up in an elementary school where like parents used to come and like fuck their kids up in the bathroom. And I know that in 2020 since, 2022 since that's not tolerated. So I think the idea of strong discipline obviously changes as we go from generation to generation. Like there are some fathers that used to beat the shit out of their kids back in the 50s. And now we would just consider that flat out abuse. Back then it was like, yeah, I hit him. You know what I mean? Like it was just normal. So I think, this idea of strong discipline, he did not spare the rod. That doesn't mean he was a bad father to me. That's just my opinion. I don't have kids. And it could be the reason why I don't have kids that I have that opinion. But I just feel like for some people and some kids, to be quite frank, like sometimes you gotta slap them. I mean, maybe not like slap them like in the face, but a nice little spanking ain't never hurt nobody. I used to get spanked. I'm normal. I sometimes get spanked as an adult. I'm normal. But no, so he had a strong disciplinary father, and then he had a very pious mother, but he was kind of a mama's boy. He spent a lot of time alone. He went to the Gilmanton Academy, and most people felt that he was just a lovely child. They were like, look, like he's got a good head on his shoulders. They said he was, quote, a lad with a future. And yes, he did have a future. His mother later said, Herman never did anything wrong. He never had to be scolded for not doing as he was told, nor for playing pranks. I never knew him to torment anyone, especially animals. Some boys, like to torment kittens, and sometimes they're very cruel to them. But Herman was too tender-hearted for anything like that, end quote. Now, that's her child, right? Like moms are going to always advocate for how they raise their own children. So, I mean, but it's kind of true. There is accounts in Gilmanton where people said, even after all the shit went down, that he was very well behaved. And a lot of the other mothers even loved him. They were just like, he's just so sweet. In Schechter's book, there's an element to it that I couldn't quite tell if it happened or not, but it was like he felt like this is in Schechter's book, Depraved, where he said, quote, he detested both his parents and dreamed longingly of their deaths. Now, one piece of literature I did not listen to was H.H. Holmes's autobiography. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we go further and deeper, especially after he's like finally apprehended and all that other shit. We'll get into it. But one of the things that I noticed, and everyone who's ever researched Holmes has noticed, is that he is a pathological liar. So, even if Schechter read the autobiography, or depending on how much research he's also done, like I haven't heard anything else about him detesting his parents. It's likely that it's totally true. Again, I'm not investigating Holmes for 20 years. Like I investigated Holmes for a month, and then like I already knew some things about him. But this idea that he was kind of like disgusted or like dreamed of them being dead, I have no evidence of that. But I will say, am I surprised? I'm not. So, as far as being like a good boy with a head on his shoulders type shit, that could have also been like the beginning of his time actually learning how to manipulate people. Because what we do know about H.H. Holmes, and I think what is true across the board, is that he was incredibly smart. And I mean smart to the point of being conniving and manipulative. And so a good boy who has a head on his shoulders, sometimes it's kind of like an animal, right? You can train a pet to kind of associate a certain behavior with a certain reward. And so like if over time, he realized, well, shit, if I'm nice to my neighbors, this can happen. And over time, he realized if I'm nice to the mothers, then this can happen. I think that is a lot of where these accounts are coming from. I think he was a good boy because he associated too good behavior with certain rewards. And as you'll see, he's a narcissist. So, in his narcissistic way, he's able to kind of manipulate his situation with niceties and like, you know, trying to convince people that he's not this terrible person. And then he does some ill shit. And then it's like, wait, he is a terrible, you know what I mean? So it's kind of, it could go both ways. He could have been inherently a good boy because he was raised by a good mother and a good father. Or he could have been a piece of shit and, you know, he was just pretending to be a good boy to get what he needed and get what he wanted. Now, there were other accounts that weren't so kind. For example, Ira Pennick was a cobbler, and he remembered that Herman was a hard worker, but he felt like there was something about him that he didn't like. This is a quote. He went to church and all that, but still, Herman was too fond of money. Ira said that he had apparently stole money from him and then tried to get him to double pay him for work that he had done for one of the town ministers. He then tried to avoid paying for even a pair of shoes that Ira had repaired. Because again, Ira's a cobbler. So, you know, there's this like kind of conniving element that he has very early on. One neighbor said Holmes was also remembered by, in the book, Holmes was also remembered by one neighbor as a boy easily influenced, who didn't appear to be well-grounded in firm principles, notwithstanding his excellent home training and instruction. So I think there was an element of him like, yeah, regardless of his upbringing, there were some elements of him that was just like, he was one of those kids that, you know, was a finesser. He was good at finessing. And the neighbors, there were certain neighbors and people in his community that kind of picked up on that. Now, a lot of these questions and a lot of this interviewing with neighbors and all this other shit happened after H.H. Holmes was apprehended, which means there is a certain line where people are you know, their recollection is going to be a little skewed by everything that's happened. It's kind of like, oh, well, he ends up being a murderer. And then you're like, well, actually, that one time he did do that one thing and it was weird. It's like it could not be associated with that. So I think it's important to make that distinction and make sure that it's understood that there's the possibility that these people's opinion of Holmes is dictated by what ended up actually happening to him. Because, you know, motherfuckers always like to make it seem like they knew some shit after the fact. It's like, yeah, hindsight is 2020. So it's easy enough to say, oh, well, that makes sense now. And it's like, but that doesn't necessarily mean that was the case. Also, one thing to think about, this is a historical piece. We're talking about the early 19th century. Papers are wrong. Accounts are wrong. There are some circumstances where newspapers and shit like that got the names wrong. This is also when everything is in its infancy. So it's not like investigative journalism is at its prime. It's like, no, these motherfuckers are just going to neighbors and people like to just tell fantastic stories. The same reason why I'm on this podcast, right? So that's one way to think about it. So take everything that I'm saying with a little bit of a grain of salt. I mean, he was a con man at the end of the day. And unfortunately, when you have spectacles like this and when you have big stories like this, people love injecting themselves into shit. Non sequitur, but it makes me think about the fact that people fucking write letters and like inject themselves into investigations all the time. And people after the fact love because attention is just so important to people. People love after the fact saying that they were involved in some shit they weren't involved in. It's like, why would you even want to be energetically connected with this situation? You know what I'm saying? But I digress. Back to his youth. So they said he was easily influenced. They said regardless of his well-grounded and firm principles that, I mean, he was still a boy, right? He was still easily influenced and people remembered him that way. There was even a clerk at the local post office. Her name was Clara Bean. She told a reporter that, quote, he was never rude to girls, unlike most boys, but he did like money. My father always said he was just like his grandfather. The grandfather, that's end quote, the grandfather, Moses Price, was known in town as a tight-fisted miser. Some later stories even suggested a streak of insanity. Holmes himself said so, that there's little to suggest a history of mental instability in the family. So here you got Moses Price, who's his grandfather, who's kind of like a cheap bastard, so they kind of just implying that there's that element of Holmes that he came by honestly from his grandfather because he liked money so much. According to Devil in the White City, though, when Holmes was 5, mind you, that's 5 years old. That's really young. He was pushed into the schoolhouse doctor's office, and he came face to face with one of the doctor's skeletons. Now, you got to think about this in this time frame, right? This is at a time where medicine, anatomy, like they're learning about everything. And what they're doing, they're not going to like some skeleton manufacturer and getting people to make, fake skeletons to hang up in class. Like they're actually getting actual skeletons to hang up in class. And they're cleaning the bones. They call them articulators. They would clean the bones and they would make them presentable to share with like students or having like having on display in anatomy classes. So he was already kind of afraid of this particular doctor's office because the way I read it in one account, he used to have a daily pass to go there and get medicine, daily doses of medicine that he really hated to do. And then there was one account where he just hated going past the office because it stank and it just reminded him of shitty medicine that he used to take as a child. So he was come on, he's 5. He was terrified and fascinated with the doctor's office. But at the same time, it's like, okay, like, I don't even want to be here for real. Now, it's likely that the doctor's office was that of a Naeem White, who was a demonstrator at the time. A demonstrator is basically a pretty word for an anatomy professor. He was a demonstrator at the time. So Naeem White comes up again because he actually had apprentices. Is it apprentices or apprentices? I don't know. Whatever. You got it. He actually used to have apprentice stay with him studying anatomy. And one of those students was Reuben Price, which was Herman's uncle. So when Herman was a teen, he also studied under White. So White kind of comes back, he comes back again later in Holmes's life, but it is believed that Naeem White was the doctor whose office this was that Holmes ended up pushed into. Now, this skeleton situation scared the fuck out of him, but it also kind of woke this beast up in him that was very interested. It opened up this curiosity that, he would later have in medicine and anatomy. So according to Adam Seltzer's book, for several years, quote, for several years, Dr. White maintained a dissection room for the benefit of his students and himself, which such an enterprise was made difficult and sometimes perilous by prejudice and the law by which one might be sent to the state prison for having in possession a human dead body. He defended human dissection and taught the public its necessity. So Dr. White, and this was actually written in an obituary that was published in the New Hampshire Medical Social Society, which was I guess it was like a medical pamphlet at the time. So Dr. White has now established himself in the Holmes story by having a dog in the fight. He's one of those people who advocated for doing what was possible to gain the medical knowledge needed, because in the grand scheme of things, this is only going to help the public in the long run. He's sitting up here dissecting bodies and having possession of human dead bodies, which at the time would have had him put away. But he defended the idea that we need to dissect humans because this is how we learn. And when you think about it, he's not wrong, but there's an element to it where it's like, yeah, well, people die all the time and it's okay to just simply ask them to, I don't know, maybe sign a fucking contract. Be like, yo, hey, you're on your deathbed and I get it, but instead of us having to rob your grave, maybe we should just fucking like ask you and maybe just have you sign a document. I don't know. Maybe that's the like proper recourse. Who knows? So in Schechter's book, Depraved, it's mentioned that around age 11, he was already conducting like secret medical experiments. Quote, first on salamanders and frogs, then on rabbits, cats, and stray dogs. And then he preferred to perform his operations on living creatures and became skilled at disabling subjects without killing them. Sometimes he retained a special part of a rabbit or cat's paw, storing his treasure in a metal box, which he kept hidden in the cellar of his house. Now, I don't put nothing past him. I'm going to just be 100% honest with you. Like, if he had this exposure to anatomy at 5, I'm not going to put him being 11 and fucking secretly cutting up frogs and animals and shit past him. I mean, it's kind of like when you think about Dahmer, you know what I mean? I don't know if everybody's watching that Dahmer show that's on Netflix. But one of the things that we notice is like, okay, at a pretty early age, he was exposed to, this idea that humans are something that are meant to be studied. And, so there isn't this like emotional connection to them all the time. Sometimes they're just subjects. And so you can see here with Schechter's quote that at the end of the day, Holmes is just at 11 already fucking treating things just like they're fucking subjects. He's like, I got to figure out how to, what's weird is that this quote says that he disables his subjects without killing them. And it's like, so there's a kind of torture element there because, I mean, if you were just investigating some shit on some like medical shit, you would just go ahead and just kill them, get it over with, and then do your situation. But to disable them without killing them first is just weird and just cruel. So by the late 1860s, he spent a little time running errands. So I guess he's still like around that 11, maybe actually earlier because he was born in 61. So around like 9, maybe even 10, he would spend time running errands. And he ran errands for this photographer in Gilmanton. And the photographer had an artificial leg. Now, this is also what fascinated and terrified him. There's these elements that keep popping up in the story where he's fascinated by what scares him. So you got a photographer who, has this artificial leg, and here you are at 9 or 10 years old and the motherfucker pops his leg off. He's thinking, what else is he going to pop off? He going to take his head off next? He going to take an arm off next? Like, that's kind of a lot to deal with, especially if you didn't grow up with that in your family and you don't understand that as a possibility at that age. Because we're not just talking about a child. We're also talking about medicine and the medical industry being at its infancy. And there are people, adults, that may not even know that this is as common as it is. You know what I'm saying? So him being 5 and kind of being fascinated and freaked out by homie just popping his leg off is, to me, it's worth noting. And if you add that in a pot with the fact that the skeleton situation happened when he was 5, we could see where this is going. So by the time we get to the 1890s, which is after he's already, been in trouble for killing people and shit, there were stories and accounts that people reference from the 1870s, which means he was like that 11, 12, 13. He was kind of a teenager, tween type age where people thought that he murdered somebody. Now, I'ma just say, I'm an L7. I'm a square. But if there's rumors, if we kicking it and somebody tells you, oh yeah, there was rumors that I killed somebody when I was 11. Red flag, stay away. Stay away. Because that just don't typically happen, right? It's like, you 10, 11 years old, maybe you accidentally killed an animal. Because there's a part of like death that children just don't understand. There's a part of violence that children don't quite understand. And, so when it comes even to animals, it's like, well, damn, I didn't mean to break the cat's neck. I was just playing with him. Like, here's a good example. When I was a kid, this is trigger warning because this has something to do with animal cruelty. When I was a kid, I had a neighbor who lived next door to me. He was kind of off, but, he was trying. He bless his heart. And this motherfucker hung a cat. on the gate. So we had like these iron fence, they weren't iron fences at the time, but they were like chain link fences. He fucking hung the cat and was so like dismissed. He dismissed it to a point. I mean, I was traumatized because even then, like we used to see dead cats all the time. Like dead cats would get like caught under the porch, or dead cats would get hit by cars. You kind of get used to seeing roadkill and shit like that. So that element was there. But we knew that at the end of the day, that didn't have anything to do with us. It was like nature. You know, like if he got caught, he got stuck, or if something happened and he ended up dead because he couldn't get out, that's different. Versus like you hanging a cat. I remember being like, wow, that's mad sick, even at the age that I was at. But there is an element to it, even at that time, where it was just like, I don't think he knew what he was doing. You know what I'm saying? Like he was playing with the cat. Why he chose to play with the cat like that is beyond me. But I do feel like even as children, especially as boys, boys can sometimes be playful and not knowing their own strength, not knowing what is actually considered violent yet. You know what I'm saying? So look, man, I'm just trying to get a man the benefit of the doubt here, because I'm like, yo, but I'm saying that to say that him murdering people, though, possibly at that age, even as a teenager, is unfucking usual. It reminds me a lot of that movie We Need to Talk About Kevin. So if any of my friends are listening to this shit, you know that I'm going to mention We Need to Talk About Kevin 1,000 times during any episode that I'm doing about anybody, because that is one movie that I feel like fully examines what it's like to be a parent and know that there is something wrong with your child, and to see all the signs and not know what to do about it. And I feel like when you go from animals, I know that there's like that, whatever it is, triangle. I can never remember it, but it's like arson, pissing in the bed, and killing cats or killing animals. When there is a certain disconnect that I feel like psychologically you must have to kill defenseless animals. I think we can all agree on that. And when he, you know, if it was true that at the age of 11, he was starting to kill animals, whether it be cats, rabbits, or salamanders and frogs, because there's also an element where, I mean, we do shit like that as kids. Like I used to catch lightning bugs and put the fucking light thing on my ears and act like they were earrings. Like we were not putting two and two together that the shit was just like kind of messed up. You know what I'm saying? So I think that there's that element that's there too. But when you get into like the possibility of a teenager murdering a person, and particularly an adult, it's kind of like, I mean, is it a rumor? Is it a rumor, or did it happen? So this particular instance, his father later disputed this in the Boston Journal. There was an accusation that Mudgett killed a man by the name of Beck, who was married to the widow of one of his uncles. The death was ruled a suicide, but people accused him anyway. I don't know why. I ain't got no deets on that. Now, again, I'm going to say this. This came out in the 1890s. Holmes was already apprehended. People are people are recalling these accounts. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're true. So that's the thing that you'll notice a lot when we're talking about H.H. Holmes, is there's going to be a lot of that back and forth shit where it's like, you can't even believe his telling of the story. That's why I didn't reference H.H. Holmes's autobiography, because he's such a fucking pathological liar. And, you know, Adam Seltzer even puts in one of his book where he kind of prefaces the fact that, like, I mean, you could read the autobiography, but what's the point? Like, you can't believe anything that he fucking says. So Adam Seltzer did tedious research. If you are interested in this at all, please read Adam Seltzer's book, because I know Devil in the White City is popular, but Adam Seltzer's book is fucking thorough. And if Adam Seltzer is any type of accurate at all, he did a bang up job in making sure that he understood. And I mean, tedious fucking news clippings and, you know, living in the library trying to get this man's life down. So check it out. So anyway, My thing, back to the man named Beck that he possibly murdered, is that if it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. And when you get into, like, for me, for example, I'm not a terrible person. I've never been accused of killing anyone or anything, right? People that don't have that element to them don't get accused of that type of shit. Same thing applies to pedophilia. Same thing applies to rape. Same thing applies to all of that shit. Anything that thieves. If it's a thief, DMX once said on Drink Champs, ooh, how did this go? What did he say? He said, basically, and I can't remember the exact quote, but he said once on Drink Champs, trust that people are who they are, but trust that you will be able to see them well. So, for example, trust a thief to be a thief. Trust a killer to be a killer. Trust those people to be the way that they are. But what you also have to figure out how to trust is that you can identify it, that you can see them well. I got to find that clip because it was so fucking good. And, you know, DMX is like, he's like a prophet. But there's a moment where he's on Drink Champs and he basically says, trust that you can see them well. Trust that you know that what that looks like. Because you can't change people. You can't change how people are going to be. You can't change who they are. Like he said, a thief is going to be a thief. A drug addict is going to be a drug addict. People are just going to be who they are. And we sometimes go so like heavy into trying to change people. And when he said that, I thought about that. I was like, that's true. Like, if you're a killer and people are like having this expectation that you're going to be different, or if you're evil and people have this expectation that you're going to be any less than what you are or whatever, then that's their fault because you're already telling them who you are. And in Herman's case, there were so many instances, and I just dealt with this, personally. There's so many instances where people tell you who the fuck they are, and you have no choice but to believe them. And anything else that you don't believe, like anything that you choose not to believe, is on you, to be totally honest. So Mudgett, having this history, he even understood that, because that's why as he went along in his life, he started changing his name. He started changing his identity, because the people that knew you before and who kind of knew these early stories of you, they're probably like, duh, what bitch would ever be with him? Who would have children with him? Who would go into business with him? He was always like this. You know what I'm saying? But there is that element to it that's just like, well, if you move to a different town and change your name, then you're a different person. And that's just kind of, he had the privilege of the time. That's why he got away with so much of this shit too. Now back to his story. There are some accounts where they say that he was married at 14 years old to a girl from New York. Now, Ira Pennick, if you remember that name, that was the cobbler. He put the kibosh on that marriage and he sent her back to New York because he was like, what the fuck? She was staying in his boarding house. And so now you're starting to build up, this behavior that he has with girls where he is just like love bombing. In a way, like he was kind of known for being that way. This girl was standing there. He started messing around with this girl. The girl was young. I mean, they were probably around the same age, but the girl was staying at Ira's house because she was just boarding. Her family wanted to get her out of New York, get her into some farming areas, some fresh air type shit, stay with Ira, which is weird. I didn't look deeper into that, but that's weird. And then, he meets her. Herman meets her that way. And that's how they end up, quote unquote, married. But he shipped her back to New York before anything was finalized. So I guess it just, that marriage never actually happened. Now, his very first marriage happened when he was around 18 or 17 years old. He eloped with this chick named Clara. Now, at 16, he graduated from Phillips Exeter Academy. That's grades 9 through 12. He took teaching jobs in Gilmanton and in Alton at 16, which I'm like, the fuck? Like, How? Why? Who? What the fuck are you teaching at 16? Like, I could barely read at 16. What are you teaching? So he's, at 16, he's teaching, he's picking up teaching jobs. Then he meets Clara. So by 18 or 17, in 1878, he elopes with Clara. Now, Clara was pretty basic, but she was well liked. They were like, she wasn't a problem. She wasn't a toxic bitch. Herman was, and her, they were digging each other from the beginning. There's a story where like Clara was kind of like messing with this other dude. And then Herman was like, yeah, I'm gonna need for you to stop talking to Clara. And so the homie, the dude that she was messing with, thought that, he may actually do some shit to me. So he backed away. So Herman had her. As soon as the next day, he was acting like they were engaged, which I'm like, Clara. Clara, girl. Like, he was a love bomber. And if you don't know what a love bomber is kind of that person who gives you everything in the beginning, but it's kind of like in an effort to manipulate you, and I mean, at the end of the day, it's a tactic. It's not just love. Like, I found out that motherfucking Armie Hammer, if you don't know who Armie Hammer is, look him up. He was like that. He's apparently a love bomber. Like, he gives you all the attention and love and the this and the that. And then it's a tactic to kind of, put you in the position to kind of like switch on you. Now, I learned out in a documentary. I don't know Armie Hammer. Okay. But he fine though too. So that was kind of upsetting. I hate when I find out that like really good looking people are fucked up like that. Herman was a love bomber. So he was always at her home. He was always reading to her and shit, which at the end of the day, I was like, wow, that is cute. Like, you got motherfucker reading to you. He reading to you. It don't get more adorable than that. And but her parents were not pleased with the early marriage. They were like, yo, like, come on, y'all 17, 18, y'all just eloping. So he was also broke. Like, so he's like a teenager, he teaching and shit. But he was just smooth. He was known for wooing women to the highest degree. So when he met Clara, he was telling people he was engaged by the next day. He fucking with Clara. He finally gets the other dude gone. He pretends like he's engaged with her. So he worked, and then this was when they were 16, but when he worked at Clara's uncle's grocery store, she gave birth to their son because he needed a place to work. So he ended up working like miles away from where Clara actually lived. And it was so cute. He used to walk to her. And this is around the time he was reading to her and all that other shit too. Now, here's the problem though. He eventually gave up the grocery store job. He was like, I am too smart for this shit. I do not need to be working in a grocery store. He wanted to go into medicine. Always talked about going into patent medicine, which is pretty true. I mean, that keeps coming up, specifically patent medicine. He went home to Gilmanton, and he studied under Dr. White. Now, you remember Dr. Naeem White. He's the doctor that his uncle worked under, and he's known for being an advocate for busting down human bodies. So creepily, later, Holmes considers White his best friend, even though they're 50 years apart. So there's 50 years between them. He did 1 year under White as an apprentice before going to Burlington, Vermont, where he roomed with a classmate by the name of Fred Ingalls. And apparently there was an incident where Holmes, I'm sorry, I want to say sorry though real quick, because he has two identities at this point. He's Herman, but he's really H.H. Holmes. So if you hear me say Herman, I mean Holmes. He's Herman right now. Later he becomes H.H. Holmes, but it's hard to kind of keep this shit together, but he's Herman right now. So there's a point where Herman wiped the floor with Ingalls. He beat his ass. And the reason why he beat his ass was because Herman took his mustache wax, which I was like, mustache wax? That's just hilarious. But there was also a beef before. Ingalls had a problem with the fact that Herman was married to Clara in Gilmanton, but he was messing around with all these other women. And so the Ingalls dude as his roommate was like, this is not respectable. So you should stop doing this. Specifically because he was fucking with Mrs. Brew's daughter. Mrs. Brew was the woman that was over the boarding house that they were staying in. She was in charge of the boarding house. Her daughter was who he was messing with. And so Fred, which is like, okay, feminists, he was like, you need to stop messing with all these different women. This is not respectable. But unfortunately, the mustache wax incident is when Holmes actually beat his ass, which I think everybody knows you can't fight crazy people. I kind of like, they work like crackheads in that way. They will fuck you up. So now we getting to the point where people are saying that he would start to experiment with different concoctions in his room. Like Mrs. Brew was just too fucking outdone. She was like, what are you doing in this room? Mrs. Brew low key reminds me of the Dahmer's neighbor. Like she's like, what is happening? She was afraid he was going to fucking burn the place down. He was very into chemistry. He was also starting to bring his anatomy interests home, which was like, because it's not the type of environment, you know, especially your bedroom or a boarding house where you would be dissecting or playing with shit like that. But there was one instance where he brought home the body of a dead baby. This scared the shit out of Fred. The account goes something like this. Fred's ass come downstairs, terrified, pale, dead pale. Sees Mrs. Brew. Mrs. Brew's like, what is wrong with you? He's like, nothing. I just need to get some fresh air. Like, I can't get to sleep. Next day, Mrs. Brew goes up there. She's cleaning the room. She's sweeping. And she finds a foul, quote, dark object under the bed. What do you think that was? It was a dead baby. Bro, you took a dead baby home. Who does that? Who? No one. Like, first of all, at this point, he's like a mediocre ass student. Like, ain't nobody even really impressed by Holmes, right? But like, so you going above and beyond and take, you know what I mean, taking your homework home. Like, I get that. But taking a dead carcass home, like, yo, huh? Who are you, sir? Like, it was just, it's too much. Like, and then it's a baby. So you knew that it would be small enough, a bundle that you can like kind of just pack and, you know, put away and nobody would like notice. And then what part of that was you just being evil and manipulative as fuck? Because here you got your homeboy, it ain't your homeboy. He's just your roommate who's got to share this space with you, knowing that there's a dead baby under the bed. Like, you know that was just a fear-based bullshit. That was an effort to kind of fuck his roommate up too. I guarantee you. Because that's just not even... That's not even remotely normal. Not to say that Holmes was remotely normal, but to do that knowing that somebody else was going to find it. Mrs. Brew, who cleans your house, and then your roommate who got to smell this shit all night. Like, no. So, like I said, he was a mediocre student. People didn't really remember much about him. I mean, at some point, he ran out of money and he had to work, so he started teaching shorthand, even though he did not know shorthand. Like, what? Like, already? Like, this is early. Like, these are like school days. Like, he gotta be like maybe 19, 20 right now. Like, not even, maybe 18 because he just finished fucking with Clara. You know, like, come on. So, there is this weird foot story too, where like, he stole a foot and took it home, which there's no evidence that actually happened. Like, there was like this one account where they were like, yeah, well, if the foot thing happened, I think more people would know about it. So people don't think the foot thing happened, but I'm not even going to get into that. The baby thing seems to actually have happened. So he leaves Vermont. Remember, he's in Burlington, Vermont. He leaves Vermont and he takes his wife, Clara, and his son, Robert, to Michigan, where he began to study medicine. Like, he's like, okay, I want to go to actual medical school. So at 19, he said, fuck college, and went to do a quick medical situation in Vermont for 1 year. Then he decided to attend medical school at the University of Michigan. So at this time, he's not having a good time with Clara. Like, Clara's sister, Laura, confirmed that Holmes' sister was adamant on Holmes leaving Clara. And that was because she felt like he wasn't good for him, which was like, first of all, Laura, fuck you. Fuck you. You can go straight to hell. You got a brother who is sick as hell and you want to badmouth Clara? And then you're like vocally saying, like out loud, you're saying, oh, Holmes should leave her because Clara's not good enough. Now, mind you, and this just goes to show that this shit must run in the family. Clara had paid for his education at this point and supported him while he was in college. So I repeat, fuck you, Laura. Like, seriously. Like, you don't get, I'm sorry, not Laura. That's Clara's sister, but Holmes' sister. You don't get no love for your little shitty opinion, because you're only further perpetuating like him being a controlling, manipulative piece of shit. You knew that Clara had paid for his education, but it's like, well, now that Clara is no use to him, then she should go. It's like, bitch, focus on your own relationships. At this point, he started to believe that being married was slowing him down anyway. So that was the thing. We didn't even need the sister. I guess I'd just be mad when I see women doing that shit to other women. It's like, you know, your brother is trash, you know? So then Clara's busting her ass. She's out here making dresses for a man who's secretly behind her back talking about ending the marriage. So he was basically pimping her. That's how I look at it. Like, if you basically was like, oh, I'm with her and I'm gonna have her pay for my education and I'm a love bomb her to death, so she wants to do everything for me, and then I'm a player. Like, that's a pimp. You just pimped her. So there were roommate accounts of them fighting a lot and of her having black eyes. I don't know how much that, is true, but Clara did eventually take her son and she went back to New Hampshire. And this was the spring right before Holmes was to graduate. She barely spoke to him after that. Clara and Robert had apparently lived with his parents in Gilmanton and then moved again, where she ended up doing more dress work. And I think she went to Tilton, New Hampshire. I think that's what the name of the city was. So there's no doubt that, and most people believe that if she didn't leave him and she followed him to Chicago, he would have eventually killed her, because he's one of those pieces of shit that dispose of people very quickly. Once you're of no use for him, or he's not interested in you anymore, he's going to dispose of you, and not in a like normal, I'm gonna just break up, in like a, oh, I'm gonna kill you type of way. So here we are. It's 1881. Holmes is in college. He's learned chemistry. He's learning anatomy. He's worked in a lab with this guy named William James Herdman. And it was believed that they were robbing graves to use as medical cadavers. They used to call these people resurrectionists. They were very popular at the time because there just weren't enough volunteered bodies. So what they would do is they would basically go to a grave, whatever the fuck, and steal them. So he becomes even more desensitized by bodies. Now, classmates would talk about how much he liked dissecting bodies. He was once mentioned taking home the body of a dead baby over spring break. Now, I don't know if this was a different instance from the situation. The way I read it, it seemed like it was a different instance when he took another dead baby over spring break. I think babies were easier to take. So another student talked about how he stole a dead child's foot one time and took it home as well. So now you're starting to see the similarities. We did have a story with the foot before in Vermont. We did have a story with the baby in Vermont, and now we're seeing another story with a foot and a baby. So I don't know if these two situations were different or the same. I think feet and babies are easy to take home. So it could have happened. Both things could have happened. Fellow students said that he was weird and he smelled like smegma. Which I will admit, when I said, oh, what is smegma, in my head, I thought it was something that was related to the area between the ball sack and the butthole. That was my theory. And then I Googled it. And then I found out that smegma is apparently a substance that develops under foreskin of the penis. Which, fucking barf. What I imagine that smells like is disgusting. The fact that he smelled like smegma, look, I don't know what his situation was down below. He could have not been circumcised. Maybe he developed a little bit of smegma, but they said that he smelled like smegma. They said he was weird. He was unresponsive to humor. And he also had what was called strabismus, which was basically, this motherfucker he was cross-eyed. They think this is some of the reason why he was so socially awkward. And later accounts reference the fact that he was bad with eye contact. Like, it could have been because he was a crook and a pathological liar. But then people took eye contact very fucking seriously. It wasn't just business. It was like, this dude cannot look at anybody in the eye. And one thing that I noticed, or one thing that I read, was that there was the possibility that the reason why he wasn't good at eye contact was because when he focused on something, that's when he went cross-eyed, which is like, oh, that's sad if he wasn't a piece of shit. It's funny because he is a piece of shit. So in some accounts even, he was considered just flat out dumb. Now, I think it's worth saying, and sorry, I put my drink in a straw cup so you wouldn't hear me like, I just thought that was weird. Where was I? Oh, so what's kind of messed up about the accounts of him being dumb? I think we know that around that time, especially after everything came out about him being a murderer, that it would be easy for people to, in retrospect, call him dumb, say that he was mediocre. So that's the thing too. We can't trust Holmes's account all the time. We can only trust what Holmes did and what Holmes got away with. And we can see from there that this dude wasn't a fucking idiot. I mean, I think we can call him an idiot in the way that we call people idiots, but he wasn't an idiot. Like, he was dumb. You know what I mean? Like, there are elements to him that was very, very too conniving to be dumb. Maybe he wasn't book smart. You know what I mean? Because there is a part about his story where you eventually find out that he wasn't really focused on learning medicine to help anybody. He was learning medicine because he's sick. And there's a part of just like anatomy and like, I think there was a little bit of control there and just narcissism that brought him to the point, especially at a time where the medical field was still in its infancy. I mean, there were stories where he was talking to Clara's sister when he worked in the grocery store, and he was just like, I want to go into patent medicine because it's lucrative. He didn't want to go into patent medicine because he wanted people not to die. He went into patent medicine because it was lucrative. So there's a part of him, a very large part of him, that is so profit-based. So that's just, I'm going to keep saying that because I think that is something very important to remember as we learn more about him. So around 1884, how old is he now? He's like 23. So while he's in college, he was messing with this hairdresser and pretending to be interested in her. And her name was Mrs. Fitch. She was a widow and she owned the boarding house that he lived in. So she ends up telling the school about Mudgett because she found out that he was married. She apparently found a letter to his wife, Clara, and she was not happy. So when she outed him, he almost got expelled. He, of course, produced letters that were either forged or some shit to kind of like verify that his handwriting was not the handwriting from the letters that she was holding, because she was saying that he had given her letters proposing marriage to her and all this other shit. Motherfucking Mrs. Fitch reported him to the medical review and almost got him expelled. She was not happy. And so he, of course, when he produced the letters, they were kind of like, he vehemently says that he wasn't a part of this, forged letters clearly matched. So they kind of just blew it off, which is some male shit. They weren't going to really believe her anyway. So when he finally graduated in 1884, he told Herman, all of it was true. Fucking Herdman was like, what? He was like, all of it was true. All that shit Mrs. Fitch said. It's true. This is the type of person you dealing with where somebody is like, oh, by the way, you remember that lie? Remember I told you that I was not fucking around with Mrs. Fitch? Now that I'm graduated, I was. Scumbag. So Herdman also recounts how he found out later that Holmes tried to rob him on 2 separate occasions. There was also an instance where Holmes had said that he wanted to do medical missionary work in Zululand. If you don't know what Zululand is, it's Africa. The fuck? Oh, I'm too done. Not Zululand. So, despite his most recent encounter with Herdman, this is according to Seltzer's book, quote, despite his recent encounter with Herdman, 3 months after graduation, he wrote to the professor for a recommendation in getting an appointment as an African missionary. Herdman declined and later said that this, I am satisfied, he did simply for the spirit of devilishness, and not that he had any serious intention of carrying out such a purpose. He took the prank as far as making an official announcement 5 months after graduating. An October 1884 issue of the Michigan Argonaut said, Herman, quote, Herman W. Mudgett, class of 1884, not 19, has an appointment as a medical missionary in Zululand. He had not gone to Africa. So while he was in Michigan, he worked as a traveler for a book publisher, and his many trips through Illinois is how he first visited Chicago. He then took another job as a traveler before a nursery company based in Maine, and that's how he ended up in New York. So, here he is. This freak moves to Morris Fork, New York, which is where it is believed he last used his real name, Herman Webster Mudgett. He would still, according to Adam Seltzer's book, use it occasionally for, a couple of years, only when it was necessary. But after that, he lived mostly under pseudonyms. So while he was in New York, he worked as either a principal at a grade school or a teacher and a physician. And he could also be he was also on record as possibly selling nursery stock. So he's in New York. He's telling people he's single. And he even had a few motherfucking proposals. I mean, dude is like, I'm single, you single, let's get together. So he starts kicking it with this woman named Minnie. Now, mind you, he ain't single. He married. He married to Clara. Okay? So we have Clara. We had the situation with Mrs. Fitch. And now we coming into a chick named Minnie Everett. Now, she couldn't stand him. She said, and I quote, I firmly believe that he would commit murder. Which I'm like, damn. Now, I don't know before or after the fact, but I'm just saying. Sometimes people know, though. Sometimes people are like, nah, this dude is sick. So he's now getting into fraud. He's really just avoiding paying people. At this point, he's trying to make a living selling fake smallpox vaccines and shit and pretending to work for the Board of Health, which is wow, during a smallpox outbreak, that's what you decide to do. And he's renting an office from this dude named Ed Steele, who was, I guess, his former landlord at some point. He brings in or he's a landlord of the office. So he brings an ill patient, and he was a soldier, to Holmes. And he basically says that I want you to treat him. He has an old bullet wound that the patient believed was causing him a ridiculous amount of pain. And while the patient was on his deathbed, the man asked for an autopsy so his wife could get his pension. So Holmes steals this man's ribs as collateral for non-payment. And the man had already had a diagnosis because the ribs, were a result of, the ribs puncturing, whatever it punctured, was a result of his injury when he was a soldier, because he had already had he had 2 diagnoses of malaria. And so they were like, nah, you just got malaria. But then Holmes ended up actually finding that his condition was a result of the bullet. So he held 2 of his ribs as collateral until Steele paid him. But the thing is Steele didn't need the ribs at that point. He had already had the documentation that he needed. So I don't know to what extent Steele had a dog in the fight. I don't know if this was just like a flat out insurance fraud type of scam, if Steele was supposed to get some money on the top and then share it with Holmes. I don't know how the situation occurred, but Holmes tried to hold on to those ribs. Now, Steele goes on to later say, quote, "I never saw a man who was more accomplished liar than the doc. He would look you right in the eye and tell a beautiful lie as you ever heard, and you would have hard work to bring yourself to doubt him. But he was a schemer." So there's that. So he goes back to Tilton, New Hampshire, where people had actually spotted fucking Clara and Robert, his first wife and his first son, picking him up at the train station, which I thought was very interesting. I mean, I guess there were a few attempts for him to try to be a father. I don't know. He's pretty much a deadbeat. So while he's in New York, he goes back to New Hampshire. Then but he's still living in New York. So he visited New Hampshire. While he's in New York, he's rumored to be involved in a case of a missing child. Now, from what I read, the way Adam Seltzer sets this up, the way I read it, the missing child was possibly his son, Robert. And what I mean by that is this. Robert, he went to New Hampshire, possibly brought Robert back to New York to help count bottles or some shit, giving him some like meaningless work to do, some father-son time type of shit. And like after everything that went down, he's accused of all these murders in the 1890s. They start to recollect about, oh shit, there was that time where Holmes brought that child. But the thing is, there's a possibility that Holmes brought Robert, and the reason why the child went missing was because he eventually took the child back to New Hampshire. So it wasn't a matter of the child disappearing or Holmes killing the child. It was a matter of him taking the child back to its home. Now, both could be true. I mean, he could have killed the child. He left New York, running from creditors. And then Holmes said he took the child to Massachusetts, which is mad sus. I mean, I will say that. I don't know I can't protect Holmes, but at the end of the day, I also think that it's possible that both things could have happened. And it could be possible that his own child was visiting him, and that after everything that happened, and everybody starts to think about, all of their encounters with Holmes, they start to put 2 and 2 together. That's not really 4. It's just not what happened. You know what I'm saying? Like, people will start to add stories to Holmes' story to make him even more a monster than he already actually was. So there's that. So in 1885, he leaves Moore's Fork. Per you, she's running away from his debts. Like, he's always running away from his debts. So he leaves Moore's Fork. He ends up in Norristown, Pennsylvania. Now, this is where he's dirt poor and hungry. He sold 2 of his horses and ended up calling the police station and telling them that he was poor, homeless, and hungry and considering suicide. And the police station was like, "Oh, you can stay in one of our cells. Cool. Like, you can stay in one of our cells. We'll help you get a job." And they helped him get a job. He got a job at the Norristown State Hospital. Now, he didn't give his real name because, of course, he's a narcissist, because he didn't want to embarrass his family. So he acted like he was from Texas. And after 2 months, he quit. He said, quote, "For years afterwards, even now, I sometimes see their faces in my sleep." End quote. He had a very shitty time at Norristown State Hospital. I will say this. Don't fall into wormholes about state hospitals. Don't do it to yourself, because you're going to end up in a state hospital. They are terrible stories usually. Like, you'll be like, "Oh, what Norristown?" Or no, I don't even know that this place was like this because I didn't look. But like, I've looked up state hospitals in the past, and I'm like, I shouldn't have, because next thing you know, it's like an innocent little wormhole situation. And then all of a sudden there's feces and there's rape. And then there's all the, the conditions of like early state hospitals and even recent state hospitals, like as recent as 40 years ago, are just inhumane. So I did not look up Norris State Hospital. But what we do know is that this man was sick in the head. And he said, even now, sometimes I see their faces in my sleep. That says a lot. That says a lot. So at this point, again, he's broke as hell. He devises a plan to fake the death of basically an entire family. Yes, an entire family. And so the scheme he did with an old college friend. So what he did, it was a $40,000 life insurance policy. He had the college friend have his colleague increase his policy to, say basically, oh, I had a near-death experience and I want to add more money to my policy. I want to make sure my family is safe because I almost died and I realized I didn't have enough. Okay, cool. The friend would send his family out west and then write a note saying that he killed his wife and child in a drunken rage and then dismembered them, pickled their bodies, and then killed himself. That was the scheme, right? Well, Holmes, the only reason why I can even think about this like in a real way, because by the way, $40,000 in the 1860s, 70s was almost $1 million. It was like 900 and something $1,000 today. So that's a lot of money. And two, you finessed it, but then you added these elements of like dismembering them and pickling their bodies and shit. Like that's extra. But the reason why I think that he added those details to the scheme was that whatever bodies they were to produce, they needed to be terribly damaged so they couldn't really identify the real people from the fake people. So they each had to come up with a body to represent a husband, a wife, and a child. They would dress the male up in the friend's clothes, and the money would then go to a relative, quote unquote, like to a relative. Like we don't know. We don't know who that is. So each person's job was to get one body. So the college friend, his friend, and Holmes, they were to get one body. Holmes went to Chicago in late 1885, then went back to Minneapolis and got a job at a drugstore and stayed there until the summer of 1886 when he went back to Chicago to finish the scheme. Now, this is how kind of he like describes it. He had one body that he put in 2 barrels. One barrel he put in storage. The other barrel he took to New York. He said it was easy to wheel the barrel, like to wheel one barrel from one place to the other type shit. Cause when you think about it, like, I don't know if you ever watch like silent movies and shit, but like sometimes movies that take place during that time, there would be like a motherfucker just like pushing a barrel across the street. And I'm like, nobody thought that was odd. It was just like what they did. So he claimed that he changed his mind while he was on the train, and he read about how good insurance companies were with investigating fraud, which who knows if any of that is true. Like any of that is true. This may have just been a cover story to justify like all the bones that they found later in the castle. Now we're coming up to when he's about to go to Chicago officially. This point, we know he went to Chicago in late 85. We know that he went to Minneapolis, and we know he ends up back in Chicago in the summer. But this is where we're going to end this story. Yeah, I'm sorry. I hate to do it to you. I really do. But unfortunately, I have to because you need to follow the next episode. So the next episode, this is what we're going to cover. We've covered his entire history up until this point. We haven't even made it to Chicago yet. He did a little mini stint in Minneapolis, which we'll focus on next episode. And then we'll focus on his segue into Chicago because we have to talk about the murder castle. We have to talk about the other women that he's married. We have to talk about the other schemes he's been involved in. And then possibly on the third episode, we're going to talk about his cohorts and the murder that actually put him away. Then we're going to talk about the connection to him and Jack the fucking Ripper. I'm just saying, the evidence, I'm just saying, it's a little sus, but we're going to get into that. So first of all, I just want to say thank you for tolerating me. Honestly. I also want to say my nose is itching because my allergies are kicking in. I need to open a fucking window. So what I'm going to say is this. Thank you. I love you. I'm here traveling through dark shit with you. Let's do it together. Let's have some more fun. Let's make some more cocktails. If there's anything that I'm doing wrong, then I'm doing great. Once I post this video, or I keep saying video, once I post this audio, feel free to hit me up. There are a few places you can do that. Lavender and Bordeaux is my Instagram. That's my personal Instagram. Then there's the Swear to Drunk podcast on Instagram. There's also my TikTok, Notorious BLP, where I do all of my TikTok videos with my alias, The Bathrobe Bar Wench, where I basically make cocktails at my kitchen counter in my bathrobe. And then there's my Twitter, which is the Swear to Drunk pod. So if you hear this, all 7 of you, and you feel like you want to ridicule me for some, go for it. I'm not going to keep you from it. That, that's a personal thing. That's a YP, not an MP. Look it up. If you don't know, that's your problem. Damn, I just told you what that meant. YP, not an MP, means your problem, not my problem. So there's that. But again, thank you so much for getting through an hour and 20 something minutes with me telling you about this horrible fucking monster. And I really hope you tune in the next time. It's only going to get better. The stories are only going to get weirder. And how about you all be good to each other? Because y'all playing games. I'm out. Bye.